Hi everybody. My name is A.D. Simone. We are now live. My colleagues and I are glad that you've joined us today. The League of Women Voters is happy to present a discussion with the Registrar of Voters for the Town of Greenwich. I'd like to give you an overview of how the webinar will work. As usual, it is a webinar, which means that only the presenters are present and have access to audio or video. Everybody else will be in audience mode and not be on camera. We will be using the Q&A at the bottom right-hand side of your screens. If you're on a desktop, you'll see the Q&A icons. That is where you can submit any questions at any time throughout the actual presentation and discussion. We ask that you submit your questions, and we will do our best to get through all the questions. If there are duplicate questions, we will only ask the question once, but please do submit a question at any point in time. Without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Chris Lowe. Chris and Christina Broderick will be your hosts for the discussion. And I would like to hand over to Chris to introduce our guests. Thanks.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Christine Lowe with the League of Women Voters of Greenwich. Thank you very much for joining us. On behalf of the League of Women Voters, the Greenwich Library, and the Greenwich PTA Council, I'd like to welcome you to a webinar discussion of how to vote in Greenwich municipal elections with the Registrars of Voters for the Town of Greenwich, Fred DeCaro and Mary Hegarty. Before beginning the session, I'd like to quickly remind our attendees that the League of Women Voters is offering a wealth of information for local voters. The League will be hosting 3 debates over the coming weeks. The debate between candidates for the Greenwich Board of Selectmen is scheduled for October 12th. The candidates for the Board of Education will debate on October 19th. And a debate between the candidates for the Board of Estimate and Taxation is scheduled for Wednesday, October 27th. Voters can register for these debates using the Zoom link on our website. In addition, the voters' guides for all candidates for political office in Greenwich are available on our website, www.LWVGreenwich.org. This will include information on all the candidates for the various boards we just discussed, as well as a voter's guide on all more than 200 RTM candidates, which will be available on October 18th. Moving on to today's session. Fred DeCaro was elected to the office of Registrar of Voters in 2008, and Mary Hegarty was elected in 2018. Together, they hold responsibility for maintaining accurate voter registration records, running the polling stations on election day, and maintaining free and fair elections in Greenwich. Today, Mary and Fred will review the process by which voters participate in local democracy and will clarify the role of your vote in deciding who leads the town and who serves on and chairs the Board of Estimate and Taxation, the Board of Education, and the Representative Town Meeting. Today's session will consist of a 30 to 45-minute presentation by Fred and Mary, followed by a 15-minute question and answer period. Audience questions can be submitted via the Q&A link throughout the presentation. Christina Broderick and I will pose these questions from the audience to our panelists during the Q&A. And with that, I will hand over to Fred.
Okay, thank you. Mary and I would like to thank the League. In addition, I believe there are co-sponsors, Greenwich Library and the PTA Council of Greenwich, who helped to publicize this event. So we are your registrars of voters. As background, there is one Democrat and one Republican registrar of voter in every Connecticut municipality. There are some odd cases where if a third party beats out one of those registrars and gets more voters, they get a registrar also, but that is a very rare occasion, and for the most part, it is the two. So we are a bipartisan office. As registrars, we work in what I consider to be sort of 3 seasons, but generally we keep the voter rolls up to date. We run fair elections. And of course, now our new job is to run those same fair elections during pandemics. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the briefly the changes that we've made as a result of that, but primarily the absentee ballots are the biggest change. As I mentioned, we do this work in 3 seasons, as I like to think of it. The spring is almost entirely dedicated to the maintenance of the voter rolls. It's during that period of time when we are canvassing folks. That means either a letter directly to your home or matching up information against the National Change of Address system, or also a consortium that Connecticut is part of, which is now 26 states, which we share information and duplicate voters who have registered in multiple states at the same time, so as to clean those lists. The summer will either be the time when we're handling things like petitions and primaries, or it's what I like to think of as our innovation time. It's usually when we're putting in either implementing new equipment or new processes so as to prepare for November. And then, of course, September on, we're fully engaged in the November election. So if you do decide to go to the polling place, you will see that our traditional 12 polling places remain open from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. In the town of Greenwich, voters always go to the same polling place. So if you have voted previously, you can expect to go to that same location, short of something like construction or something, which would create a temporary displacement. Our polling places are all gyms or very large meeting rooms, which has allowed us to maintain social distancing without much trouble. And of course, we do have PPE, and we are asking everyone to wear a mask on election day. For those who are not registered in advance of election day, we have something called election day registration, also referred to as same day registration. And that allows you to register on November 2nd by coming to town hall. You do not go to your polling place, you come directly to town hall. And more information about that can be found on our website. Of course, if you're here and you're engaged, and today is National Voter Registration Day, you should be registering in advance so you don't have to go through that process on election day. I would note that election day registration is not for primaries or special elections. So for instance, we recently had the state Senate 36th district. You could not register on that day for that election. It is only for regular elections. Now, so typically, and this is one of the changes related to the pandemic, 1 out of 12 Greenwich residents votes by absentee ballot. But in 2020, about 46% of our voters, about 16,500 of our fellow citizens, chose to vote by absentee, which means we had a substantially different and more robust absentee ballot operation. Mary was fully dedicated to that operation during the entire day before coming back to work on all of the counts coming in from the polling places, where we had 50 poll workers who were supervised throughout the day, running 6 tabulators, really the largest operation of its kind in Connecticut, because we are generally a town with a lot of absentees. So we knew it would be that much greater in this election. I think one of the things that I wanted to mention that we're really proud of, and Greenwich voters should be proud of, is that in previous elections, people made mistakes filling out their ballot, putting it in the correct envelope, sealing that envelope, signing it, etc. Together with the League, together with the Secretary of State's office, there was a lot of education related to that, and that rejection rate fell from 2% to under 0.5%. So congratulations to everyone involved in that. Our 12 polling places are spread out throughout Greenwich. They are primarily in the districts they serve, in some cases right on the bounds of those. And to say a little bit more about the absentee ballot process, this is a two-part process for most folks. If you do want to vote by absentee ballot, you first need to fill out and request an absentee ballot application, which is a specific form which can be downloaded from our website, at which point the town clerk will mail you the ballot. No ballots have been mailed out yet. The earliest they can be mailed out is October 1st. And so a large chunk will be going out on October 1st, and more will go out every day on a rolling basis as applications come in. You must, that ballot must be received back by the town clerk by election day. It is not postmark, which counts. It is the actual receipt of the ballot. Thanks to some federal grants, the Secretary of the State has purchased ballot drop boxes. Mary will tell you that those are now going to be permanent fixtures. Here in the town of Greenwich, there is one outside of Town Hall, and there is one in the lobby of the Public Safety Complex. Those are both monitored and open 24 hours, and they are available right now for applications to slip in, and they are also going to be available for you to put in your ballots up until 8 p.m. on election day. So as I mentioned, it is a two-part process, application and then ballot for voting. However, if you visit the town clerk's office, you can do both of those things simultaneously and vote your ballot at the same time. This is a form of early voting that is available due to the COVID excuse to every citizen in Connecticut for this election. That is not going to be the case for future elections unless there are changes to our Constitution. So if you want to see what that is like, by all means, now is the time to do it, because everyone is eligible to vote by absentee and can either do that via the mails, the drop boxes, or by visiting the town clerk's office. We do encourage you, since today is National Voter Registration Day, to double check your information. You can visit our website at greenwichct.gov/vote. And when you're there, you'll see our voter information lookup, which will tell you your confirm your address, your party, that you're an active voter, and as you get earlier or later into the season, whether or not your absentee ballot has been issued and or received by the town clerk's office. So one of the key questions we were asked to field today were, what are the positions on the ballot in Greenwich, and how does your vote help determine the leadership in some of the multi-opening offices? So running through the front side of the ballot, the first four positions, we have the first selectman, for which you can vote for one, and there is one Republican and one Democrat listed on the ballot. Selectmen, you can also vote for one, but we'll talk more about that. There is one Republican and one Democrat. However, the combination of the two positions make for three people who make the Board of Selectmen. So what happens is those who have declared for selectmen are running purely for that position. Those who have declared for first selectman are in fact running for first selectman, but in the chance or in the event, because of course one of the two will not win the spot, they will then drop down and be competing for one of those spots on the Board of Selectmen. So so there are effectively three candidates, or there will be three candidates who are vying for that when the votes are cast. So what this means is that in many cases, traditionally, whoever wins the first selectman's race, a member of their party is also selected as one of the selectmen. But there are rare occasions where a first selectman may not have coattails that help bring in their second selectman or their other selectman candidate, and you can have two selectmen of the opposite party from the first selectman. So this occurred in, I believe it was 1998. Tom Ragland ran for office with Sam Romeo, and I think it was it Stephanie Sanchez and Dick Bergstresser were both the selectmen, I believe, and Tom Ragland was the first selectman, and Sam did not garner enough votes, so Tom Ragland ran his second term in office as the first selectman, but as the only Republican on the 3-member board of selectmen. So obviously his initiatives were, adjusted as a result of that. Also on the ballot are two other single office positions, the town clerk and the tax collector. They are both being contested this year with one Republican and one Democratic candidate, and they are single office positions. The winner takes all. So one of the more complex situations on the ballot is the Board of Estimate and Taxation. So this position is defined in the town charter, and the charter specifically limits any party from nominating more than 6 candidates for this board. And I should mention that in certain cases here, I'll be quoting the charter, and in other positions, I may be quoting state statute. Sometimes one supersedes the other. Sometimes we have used the charter to adopt specific statutes within the general statutes for a particular purpose, and they work together. In the cases, usually what we're talking about is minority representation. Very rarely do we say, and no one should ever assume that any party is entitled to any position. What the laws actually say is no party may have more than a specific number of seats, but no one is in fact granted anything. There are no seats reserved for Republicans or Democrats. So, as I mentioned, the charter limits either party from nominating more than 6. Given there are 12, that typically means 6 Republican and 6 Democrats are nominated. However, there have been cases where there are third parties or just petition candidates who will also be nominated to the board. So this comes from Section 4 of the charter, and in particular, it talks about the leadership of the Board of Estimate and Taxation. The chairman and vice chairman of the board shall be chosen from those members of the board who belong to the political party receiving the greatest number of votes cast for all the candidates of any one party for members of the Board of Estimate and Taxation at the last town election. So what does that actually mean in numbers? To give you examples from the last 2 elections, the total number of votes cast for all 6 of the Democratic candidates in 2017 was 37,789. The Republicans about 450 less. And so as a result, one of the 6 Democratic members of the Board of Estimate and Taxation was nominated and became eligible to be chair of that organization. That I believe that chair, not sure how it works. I believe they do in fact have a tie-breaking vote. So in the event of something that's split, they can in fact break a tie. But there are a lot of situations on that board where you have to have a majority as well. So you'll see that in 2019, in fact, the fortunes were reversed. The Republican candidates had more votes than the Democratic, and so the chairmanship of the board went back to the Republican caucus, and that chair was Mike Mason, and now temporarily Karen Fassiliotis since he stepped down. So after the Board of Finance, Board of Tax Estimate and Taxation on the ballot, the next positions are the Board of Education. And you will notice specific language listed under the words Board of Education on the ballot. 4 to be elected, not more than 2 from one party, vote for up to 4. So the way this works is the Town of Greenwich has specifically adopted one of several methods of electing a Board of Education, which allows for the parties to nominate more candidates than can in fact be seated under minority representation rules. So if a party chooses to put up more than 2 candidates, they put up 2 or 3 or 4, voters may vote for up to 4 from any combination of the parties. I will tell you, having looked at absentee ballots and stuff as they come in, it is an important item to educate people on, because when a party sometimes nominates more than 2 candidates and nominates 3, for instance, if they tend to vote by party line and they bubble in all 3, unfortunately, there's no way to determine which were the 2 that they were actually interested in, and so that vote does not count at all in terms of the overall votes. So it is important that while one can vote for up to 4, you do need to remember that if you vote for more than 2 from either party, it's going to in fact nullify that vote. No party may hold more than a bare majority of the board. And on an 8-member board, the statute says that the maximum number of candidates of any party that any party may hold is 4. So as a result, a winning candidate, meaning a candidate that has the most votes in a particular election in terms relative to others, may not necessarily gain a position. And let's look at this more closely with this is actually a very similar to an actual scenario that occurred about 16 years ago, 12 years ago. So as I mentioned, each party can nominate either 2, 3, or 4 candidates. So these are example results from a hypothetical election. And in this election, the Democratic candidates outpolled their Republican counterparts, all 3 of them outpolling both of the Democratic candidates, Republican candidates. However, only candidate A and B would be seated, because according to those minority representation rules, no party can have more than a bare majority, which in this case is 4. And so since there's already 2 from the previous election, there'd only be 2 Democratic candidates eligible. So Democratic candidate C, despite having 3,000 more votes than his Republican counterpart, would not be seated. So the Board of Education does not use the same method as the Board of Estimate and Taxation to choose their leader. It is chosen among themselves, and it requires a majority of the members of the 8-member board. If a majority is not gained, then according to section 10-218 of the Connecticut General Statutes, the selection of the chairman and the secretary become the responsibility of the Board of Selectmen. And that did occur about 6 years ago. It went to the Board of Selectmen, which at the time was Peter Tessie, John Toner, and Drew Marzullo, and they selected they did not select either of the candidates put forth. I believe they selected a 3rd candidate, from among the members, and that person, served for a year until the board was reconstituted after the next election, and at that point, a majority elected a new chairman. Also on the ballot are the Board of Assessment Appeals and Constables. So the Board of Assessment Appeals is a 5-member board. Each party may nominate up to 3 candidates. This year, there are, in fact, 3 Democratic candidates and 3 Republican candidates. So there will be a contest, and the 6th person in line, when the vote totals come up, will not be seated, and either party can take the majority. And as far as constables, there are 7 constables. Each party may nominate up to 4. This year, I believe the Republicans have nominated 4 and the Democrats have nominated only 2. They actually have 1 open slot. So everyone who is on the ballot will win. And then there is an opportunity for someone to be nominated midterm since there were not enough candidates coming forward. So finally, and some might say, and perhaps one of the things that makes Greenwich so special is we do have the representative town meeting, a very unique body. I was really pleased to serve on it for 10 years myself, which is nonpartisan and represents voters from around town. The body is, contains 230 members, and they are elected from a specific geographic district. There are 12 districts. They correspond with the voting districts in town. And there are maps on our website which divide out that geographically. The number of, so the RTM is not redistricted on a 10-year basis, similar to what happens for the state races, such as congressional or the state representative or the state senate. Instead, within these specific geographic districts, the number of members representing a district is reapportioned every 2 years. That is done in July of the same year in which the RTM members are up for election. So it was done this year. And it is shifted based upon the number of registered voters in the district. Typically, there's not a significant shift. I believe this year, 1 district gained 1 representative and 1 lost 1 representative, but they're pretty stable. There is a League of Women Voters guide, which is excellent, describing this process, including how one petitions originally to get on to the representative town meeting ballot. And I would advise anyone interested in it, as well as the other positions, to take a look at the League's guide on how to run for office. So I'm going to turn this over to my colleague Mary now, who is going to use her legal expertise as a, she does have a law degree, and she is going to talk to us a little bit about recent changes in Connecticut laws. There were quite a few that came through this year. And Mary, I'll take it from you. You just tell me when to change the slides.
Okay, great. Thanks, Fred. So in June of 2021, the state legislature, as part of something called a budget implementer bill, enacted a number of laws that affect how voters vote and how Fred and I do our jobs as registrars of voters. There were a couple temporary changes that will disappear after the November 2nd election, simply because of COVID. Absentee ballots, as Fred said, are available to all voters in Connecticut. This is very interesting because earlier in the state legislature, the legislature did pass legislation that will put in front of the voters of Connecticut in 2022 whether the state constitution should be amended to allow for early voting. They also addressed a possible amendment to the state constitution related to no excuse absentee ballot voting. That legislation did not pass by a sufficient majority. It needs to be voted on again, and the earliest it can be on the ballot for Connecticut voters to voice their opinion about it is 2024. Connecticut is one of 15 states that normally require an excuse for voting by absentee ballot. But as Fred mentioned earlier, this time around, everyone can vote by absentee ballot. Another permanent, temporary change to the Connecticut law on elections is that the mandatory supervised absentee ballot voting that registrars of voters conduct in nursing homes was canceled for the November 2nd election due to COVID. There are residents of nursing homes have been supplied with absentee ballot applications and will be receiving assistance with those and assistance with their ballots, but it won't be the normal procedure that we follow. And I'm ready for the next slide. Thanks, Fred. The more permanent changes, there were many. So one is that Connecticut now has a mandatory voter registration drive in all of Connecticut's public high schools in the month of September. We have one later in the year, but it's new to have one in September. And I want to take this opportunity to say thank you to Aaron Hull at Greenwich High School and to Kathy Steele of the League for coordinating a great voter registration effort, which is actually taking place tomorrow. The registrars supplied voter registration cards for all seniors at Greenwich High, and they'll be meeting in their homerooms tomorrow. And several students put together a wonderful video describing how to fill out the voter registration card and some other information about voting for the students. So they'll all be watching the video, filling out the cards, and we're hoping for a great response from them. Another change is that does not apply for the odd year elections, but applies on the even year state elections, allows employees to request 2 hours of unpaid time off to vote. So Connecticut was one of 19 states that did not allow paroled felons who were, did not allow paroled felons to vote. Now, under this new legislation, the voting privileges of convicted felons who are on parole are restored. If they're still incarcerated, they are not permitted to vote. There's some changes that affect Fred and me more than would be necessarily noticed by the voters here in Greenwich, but the time frame for checking and processing of absentee ballots has been expanded. That could come into play more when we have an election the size of a presidential election. As mentioned earlier, drop boxes are now a permanent fixture of the Connecticut landscape. They can be used for dropping absentee ballot applications and the absentee ballots. Next slide, please, Fred. Thanks. So there's quite strict rules about who can handle an absentee ballot, and the legislation expanded the definition of who is eligible to return a voter's absentee ballot to include siblings. Before, siblings were not part of the family members who could handle the ballot. And it also expanded the definition of voters' designees. So designees are, have been people who are a caregiver or a family member. And now they can also be police officers, registrars of voters, deputy or assistant registrars. And in the new legislation, they can be designees whether or not the family member or the caregiver is available. Permanent absentee ballots are now available to voters who are suffering from long-term illness. Before, the definition was that they were available to voters who had permanent disabilities. And then there's several changes that affect how voters conduct business. Sometimes people ask us for lists of the registered voters. And in the past, we would supply lists that included the information of the voter's date of birth. Now we must only supply the year and month of birth. Centrally counted ballots. This is how we count ballots in Greenwich, absentee ballots, sorry, in Greenwich. And in the past, when we have the post-election state mandated audits, the absentee ballot processing operation was not included in the lottery that determines which districts would be subject to the audit. But now the absentee ballot, centrally counted absentee ballots are included in that. And a final point is that registrars can no longer appoint polling place challengers. Next slide, Fred. Thanks. So we need you. Being a poll worker is a very rewarding way to be part of the election process. You need to be a US citizen, 16 years old, a resident of Connecticut. Poll workers are trained by us and paid for the long day, which is from 5 a.m. to 8 p.m. If you're interested, please go to the Town of Greenwich website. You can search for I want to work at the polls. We have an application there that you can fill out, and we actually do need poll workers for the upcoming election. So if anybody's interested, please consider participating in democracy in this very important way. And that is all I have. We have contact information for Fred and me, and various resources in the town, including the League of Women Voters candidate information.
Fantastic. Thank you, Fred and Mary, so much for all that information. We want to open it up to any questions from the attendees. So please start putting them in the chat. I see, or sorry, in the Q&A. I do see one here.
I saw one in the chat. Somebody wanted to
when are the
when.
Yeah.
Yes. So absentee ballots will be counted on election day. The ballots that are returned on election day cannot be counted until the polls have closed, because we need to compare those submitted absentee ballots to the paper poll books that we have, and be sure that somebody isn't voting by absentee who also went to the polls. So at this point, we do have time after election day to complete that process, but I'm hoping we'll complete the whole process on election day. It sort of depends on how many people choose to vote by absentee ballot.
Okay. Are there any other questions? There's a question about, would you clarify that the real power voters have to influence the composition for the BET is to vote for all candidates of the party they wish to control the board. Is that, could you, in other words, come back to the point about?
Sure. So
Yeah.
since the board is evenly split, obviously the tie vote is critically important on any matters of some controversy. And since the chairmanship goes to the party that collects the aggregate most number of votes, if you have 6 votes to cast, as we all do, it behooves you to cast all 6 of those votes for a particular party so as to push the chairmanship in that direction. I think that's what the voter is suggesting here.
All right, it looks like we have another question here on where do you request an absentee ballot?
So absentee ballots are, it's the town clerk who is in charge of giving out absentee ballots and collecting absentee ballots. The registrars of voters are in charge of counting absentee ballots. So you can, as Fred mentioned, the most efficient way to vote by absentee ballot is to go to the town clerk's office as of October 1st, when the actual ballots are available. You can fill out your absentee ballot application, hand it back. They'll hand you your ballot and you can fill out your ballot. But if you can't do that in person or don't wish to, you can call the town clerk to request an absentee ballot. You can go online to, an absentee ballot application. You can go online to download an absentee ballot application. You can drop those into the Dropbox outside of town hall or in the police station, or you can mail them in. And then the town clerk will send you your absentee ballot, and then you can return it the same way. I do want to emphasize that the mail can be somewhat slow these days. And as Fred mentioned, your actual ballot needs to be at the town clerk needs to have received your ballot by 8 p.m. on election day. That could be dropped into the Dropbox. She will be emptying the Dropbox at 8 p.m. on election day. But after that, your vote would not be counted.
Okay, there's a question here of what is a constable? And there was another position listed on that page. Yeah, if you could comment on that.
Yeah, so I'm going to read directly from the League of Women Voters Guide on how to run for office, which has a very short description of both of those. So for the constables serve legal papers and follow up on delinquent taxes, not including real estate. So a constable can follow up on personal property taxes if they are designated by the tax collector. As we mentioned, they can serve legal papers. And in addition, it does say in our charter that if a member of the Board of Estimate and Taxation does not come to a meeting, the chair of that board can have a constable go out and retrieve them and bring them to the meeting. I'm not sure when was the last time that was ever used, however. And for the Board of Assessment Appeals, that board holds hearings during the month of March to review all taxpayer complaints about the grand list and assessments that come out. Applications are received in February, and typically either 2 or 3 members of that board will hear a particular case and make an adjustment if so warranted.
I think we have a question just clarifying for the Board of Education. Both Democratic candidates will be seated, but only 2 of the 4 Republican candidates will be seated. Nonetheless, voters should not vote for more than 2 candidates from either party. That's the question.
Well, as a practical matter, if you vote for more than 2 candidates, we are unable to determine, which candidate is your preference. And so while they will all get a vote, it's the equivalent of voting for none of them, right? So yes, if you want your vote to count, you should not vote for more than 2 candidates from either party.
Okay. For Constable, to be sure I can vote for all 4 and not throw away my vote, like if I voted for all 4 Republicans on the BOE.
Correct. For Constable, you can vote because up to 4 constables can be seated from each party. So you could vote for 4 Republicans or 4 Democrats.
Okay. I don't see any questions on the chats. I have a question. If you're an independent, how could you run for one of these offices?
Okay. So first, to clarify, independent is in fact a party registered in the state of Connecticut, and they have their own nominating rules and cross endorsement rules. Oftentimes people use the term independent when they actually mean unaffiliated, meaning they're not registered members of either party. And in fact, that is I believe, the largest body of voters in the town of Greenwich is in fact the unaffiliated. So an unaffiliated voter does not go through a party nomination process. So what they need to do is they need to collect signatures. And there is a nominating petition. And for most offices, it requires, I believe, 5% of the, no, excuse me, it requires 1% of the number of votes cast in the previous election. So, for instance, if there are 20,000 votes cast in the last first selectman's race, someone could enter that race with as little as 200 signatures as a petition candidate. And that has happened. There were numerous petition candidates early on in Peter Tessie's administration, I believe. There were a couple of times there were other people on the ballot. So, and that holds for any of the offices. So any office will allow for someone to get one of those petitions and get those signatures. It's late for that now. Those signatures are all due by the middle of August. But if you do have an interest, either the town clerk's office or our office could advise you on who to contact at the Secretary of State to get those petitions.
We have a question here. What is the recent experience with voter turnout in municipal elections? Someone told me it's around 30%. Can that be true?
That can be true. It's just not true for Greenwich. So in Greenwich, the turnout is between 40 and 45%. So that is still far less than a majority of registered voters, right? Where we had 86% who voted in the presidential election. But to give you some good news and to give you an idea of the relative difference in engagement between Greenwich and some of its neighbors, in the last year, there have been 3 special elections. There were 2 in Stamford, and there was one, there was one entirely in Stamford, one that was Stamford and Darien combined. It was a state senate. And there was a Greenwich race that was Stamford, New Canaan, and a portion of Greenwich for State Senate 36. In the Stamford races that did not involve a candidate from Greenwich, the turnout was 9% in one race and 12% in the other. In the State Senate 36 race we just had, the turnout in Greenwich was about 28%. So you can see that we are significantly more engaged than some of the other towns around us.
Okay. What percentage of voters are registered from the pool of residents who are eligible to register?
There's no perfect answer to that. However, Mary and I joke a little bit about this. So if you take the census figures and you subtract out all of the folks registered who are under 18 years old and all of the expats that live in town who are not citizens, then in theory, Greenwich is between 95, and 100% registered. So we do believe it's a very high number, but it's hard to truly quantify. But I do believe that it is approaching that number.
We have a question. Is there a public list of registered voters in all parties?
Yes.
Yes, there is a public so yes, there is a public list of registered voters. You can certainly come into our office and or contact us to find out information about a specific voter. It is all public information. That list is also under Freedom of Information available for sale, and there's an order form if you wanted to purchase that list on our website.
Well, I want to mention that if you're running for an office in town, you are entitled to that list. Most people would want an electronic version of the list, but you are entitled. So people running, for example, for the RTM, they may want a list of all the registered voters in their particular district, which we're happy to provide.
Yes, candidates get one list for free.
Okay. The registrar's website contains demographic information on election voting only for the year 2017. Do you plan to update that info?
We do. We would love to have a volunteer help us. So that is in a program called Tableau that's really hard to work with. And the town IT department helped us put in the information. The gentleman who did it has since moved to Australia. And we would love, we have the information. It's just a super complex program to visualize the data in. And I would love to upgrade it. And we have some ideas on being able to move that data through time so people can see the shifts, et cetera. But it requires someone who really understands Tableau and business intelligence software, which is beyond either Mary or my ken at this point.
What is the percentage breakdown of party registration between Democrats, Republicans, and unaffiliated in Greenwich?
Well,
Mary,
I can't give you the numbers, but as Fred mentioned, the unaffiliateds are definitely the largest group. The Democrats have overtaken the Republicans, but they're, not by a huge amount. Maybe you know, Fred, off the top of your head. I'd have to look. Fred?
No, I don't actually, but certainly we do print it out and track it on a monthly basis. So we actually have very good data going back for about 10 years, if anybody's interested. And then we have, spot printouts and things like that from previous years. So we can give you some data going back 20 or 25 years. I will say that it's completely reversed in my tenure in office, where originally it was Republicans at first and then Democrats and then unaffiliated. And now it's gone the exact opposite way.
So I have two questions. One is a follow-up to that. Is there a difference in turnout amongst the Democrats, unaffiliated, and Republicans, generally speaking?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
You see it most in the local elections. So in particular, the unaffiliated drop-off in the local election is very significant.
Mm-hmm. And then the other question that I have is, what's a polling place challenger? There was a reference.
Yeah, so, well, a polling place challenger is at this point a fictional person because they don't exist anymore. But the idea was this was someone who could be appointed by either of their registrars to basically stand there and observe what was going on in the polling place and could challenge the legitimacy, not indiscriminately, of any particular voter based upon their based upon their residence or any other information they may know about that person. We have not had a polling place challenger appointed by any registrar in my memory, so in at least 30 years. So
great. So I just looked up the registration numbers as of, I think it would have been September 1st. There's 41,266 people registered to vote in Greenwich, 15,992 unaffiliated, 11,994 Republicans, and 12,494 Democrats. And there are also people registered in the Independent Party and a couple other parties. I didn't grab those numbers. But I also wanted to make a comment about turnout, which is that Fred is, it's totally correct that the unaffiliated are the voters who drop off in local elections or in special elections as we had this summer. But I think it is fair to say that the Republican voters do turn out more, historically have turned out more for local elections and special elections.
Okay, interesting. And we've got one additional question here. Which offices in the November 2nd election have a direct impact on our public schools? My understanding is that it is BOE, BET, RTM, and First Selectman related to the school capital budget. Is that correct?
I can't think of, I would say that's a very fair assessment, certainly. I mean, the First Selectman having the least authority in that whole scenario. So the Board of Education budget is first drawn up by the Board of Education. It then goes to the BET, who can either increase or reduce it, and then to the RTM, who only has the power to reduce the budget. I think the main place where the First Selectman has power relates specifically to the capital items. So.
Okay. All right, I think we are out of questions and we are just about out of time. Fred and Mary, thank you so much for sharing your time and perspectives with us. We really, really appreciate it. I want to say thank you to everyone who joined us. Please remember to register for our debates in October, and please remember to vote in November. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alrighty.